That's the headline. But the real story is darker. They came after me for a cabin, miles outside their reach. They threatened. They fined. They even claimed they owned part of my land. And just when I thought it was over, they went further than anyone could imagine. What happened next? Nobody in my neighborhood will ever forget. Welcome back to HOA Chaos, where we bring you the wildest stories of petty power and suburban drama. My name is David. I'm just a regular guy living in a quiet suburb in Oregon. I work a normal job, pay my bills, and I thought buying a small cabin in the woods would give me peace. But what I didn't know was that my cabin would drag me into the ugliest fight with the HOA I had ever seen. And this fight would end in a courtroom. With the whole neighborhood watching, I thought buying a cabin in the woods would give me peace. No neighbors, no lawn inspections, no committee watching my every move, just silence, trees, and the sound of birds in the morning. For years I dreamed of it. A little place where I could escape, breathe, and forget about the small wars of suburbia. So when I found this cabin, an old wooden house surrounded by tall pine trees, I didn't think twice. I signed the papers, packed my weekends, and drove out every chance I got. The cabin was mine. It was freedom. It was quiet. It was home. But peace never lasts long when you live under an HOA. At first, I didn't believe it. A plain white envelope showed up in my mailbox. No return address, no name, just a warning. It said the property I bought was in violation of community standards. I laughed because my cabin was not even in their neighborhood. It was outside their boundary, outside their control, completely separate. I thought it was a mistake, a silly mix-up, so I tossed the letter aside and went about my day. But then another on. I sat on the porch for hours, listening to the wind, and I thought about every neighbor who had warned me about the board, how they said, once the HOA sets its eyes on you, they don't stop. How they said, no one ever wins against them, but I refused to believe it. I refused to let them take what was mine. I knew I had to fight back. But how do you fight an enemy that hides behind rules, papers, and signatures? How do you fight people who believe they are the law? The thought haunted me, because I realized this was not just about money. This was about control, about pride, about a group of neighbors who thought they could own everything, even freedom. That night I made a promise to myself. I would not give in. I would not pay a single cent. If they wanted a fight, they would get one. And so it began. The battle between one man and an entire board of power-hungry neighbors, a battle that would not only shake my street, but would end inside a courtroom, where the truth would finally explode. I told myself I wouldn't break, but the HOA had other plans. The next week, they sent me another notice. This one wasn't just a piece of paper. It was a warning, bold, underlined, stamped with authority. It said if I didn't pay within 30 days, they would initiate foreclosure proceedings. Foreclosure. That word hit me like a punch in the chest. They were threatening to take my cabin, a place I bought with my own money, a place that wasn't even under their rule. I could feel my blood boiling. How dare they? How dare a group of neighbors, people who argued about grass height and mailbox color, think they could destroy someone's life over nothing? I walked into the next HOA meeting. It was held in the community clubhouse, a bland room with beige walls, plastic chairs, and a fake American flag in the corner. The kind of place where people argued over nonsense and thou. But it mattered. I stood in the back, waiting, watching. The president sat at the front table. Her pearls shined under the fluorescent lights. Her lips curved into that same cold smile. Beside her, the treasurer tapped his pen like a metronome. The secretary scribbled notes furiously. Like every word they said was holy scripture when it was time for community concerns. I raised my hand. The president called on me with fake politeness. Yes, David, do you have something to share? I walked to the front. I placed the $30,000 lien notice on the table, and I said, "This is harassment." The room went silent. Every board member looked at me, but none of them spoke. The president finally leaned forward, and with that smug tone she used on everyone, she said, "Rules are rules, and you broke them." I wanted to laugh. I wanted to scream. Instead, I said, That cabin isn't even in your area. You have no power there." The treasurer smirked. The secretary avoided my eyes. The president tilted her head and said softly, "Power is what we decide it is." The room erupted in whispers. Neighbors stared at me like I was the troublemaker, not them. I left the meeting shaking with rage, because I realized something that night. The HOA didn't care about rules. They cared about control, and they were willing to lie, cheat, and threaten to keep it. Days passed. The letters got worse. One claimed I owed late fees on the lien, even though it was false to begin with. Another said they would place a lock on my cabin if I didn't comply. I didn't even know they could write something like that. But I knew their threats were meant to scare me. One morning, I found something new, a bright orange sticker slapped across my cabin door. "Property under lien. Do not remove." It looked official, like a government order, but I knew it came from them. The HOA had driven out to my cabin in the woods, trespassed, and marked it as if it belonged to them. I peeled it off with shaking hands. The paper tore, but the anger stayed whole. They crossed the line. This wasn't about letters anymore. This was war. I started documenting everything, every letter, every email, every sticker, every word. I built a file so thick it could crush a desk, because I knew one day I'd need it. I also started digging into their rules, late at night, under the dim light of my kitchen lamp. I read every line of the HOA bylaws, page after page, line after line, searching, and then I found it, a boundary map, clear as day. My cabin was not inside their jurisdiction. They had no claim, no power, no authority. My hands trembled as I traced the line with my finger. They lied. They knew they had no right, but they tried anyway. Why? Because they thought I would fold. That night I made a decision. I would not fold. I would fight. And I wouldn't just fight. I would expose them. The next week I filed a complaint, not just with the county, but with the court. If they wanted to take me to court, I'd get there first. I hired a lawyer, a sharp man with a sharp suit, and eyes that didn't blink much. When I showed him the file, he smiled. "You've got them," he said. "They've overreached, and judges don't like bullies." We filed papers, we served notices, and suddenly, the HOA wasn't so confident anymore. The president avoided me on the street. The treasurer looked nervous at meetings, but still, they didn't back down. Instead, they doubled down. One day, I got a knock on my door. It was the HOA president herself. She stood there with two other board members. She smiled, but her voice was sharp. "You don't want to do this," she said. "This will destroy you. Just pay and walk away." I stared at her. I wanted to slam the door, but instead I leaned closer and whispered, "See you in court." Her smile cracked, her eyes narrowed, and for the first time, I saw fear. The weeks that followed felt like a movie. Lawyers, filings, hearings. The HOA tried to bury me in paperwork, but every lie they told only made their case weaker. They even forged documents, claiming my cabin was annexed years ago, but my lawyer tore that apart in minutes. Every step we took, they stumbled. And then, the day came. The courtroom, the judge, the showdown. I walked in with my lawyer and my thick file of evidence. The HOA board sat across from me. The president looked pale, but still tried to act confident. The treasurer shuffled papers nervously. The secretary kept her eyes down. The judge entered. The room stood, and the battle began. My lawyer spoke first. He laid out the evidence clearly, calmly, confidently. Every letter, every sticker, every false claim. He showed the map, the boundary, the proof they had no authority. The judge leaned forward, his brow furrowed. Then it was their turn. The HOA president stood. She tried to spin the story. She said I was defiant, that I disrespected community standards. She waved papers around like they meant something, but the judge wasn't buying it. At one point, he interrupted her. "Ma'am, this cabin is not in your jurisdiction. How do you justify this lien?" Her mouth opened, but no words came. Silence filled the room. I'll never forget that moment. The power drained from her face. The smirk vanished. For once, she had no control. The judge turned to me. He said the lien was invalid. unlawful, void. He said the HOA had abused its power, and that I had every right to fight back. The gavel struck, the sound echoed like thunder. I won. Neighbors gasped, some clapped quietly. The HOA board shuffled out in shame. I walked out of that courtroom lighter than air for the first time in months. I could breathe. The cabin was safe, my freedom was safe, but the war wasn't over. The neighborhood still whispered. Some people called me a hero, others called me reckless, but I didn't care. Because I proved one thing, the HOA wasn't untouchable, and sometimes the little guy wins. The gavel struck, and just like that, I thought it was over. I thought I had won. I thought the HOA would finally back down, but I was wrong. The board didn't disappear. They didn't vanish into shame like I hoped. Instead, they grew colder, quieter, and more dangerous. The very next week, I found another letter in my mailbox. It wasn't about the lien anymore. It was about me. It said I was a threat to community stability. It said my behavior was hostile, and it demanded that I cease all disruptive actions. I laughed when I first read it, but deep inside, I knew what it meant. They were not done with me. They were shifting the battle. If they couldn't beat me in court, they'd try to destroy me at home. Neighbors started acting differently. People I had known for years wouldn't look me in the eye. Some whispered when I walked past. Others crossed the street to avoid me. It was as if the HOA had poisoned the air. I saw the president at the grocery store one evening. She didn't smile. She didn't nod. She just stood in the aisle, staring at me. Her eyes filled with something darker than anger. It was hate, pure and sharp that night. I couldn't sleep. I sat by my window, staring into the quiet street, and that's when I noticed something. A car parked at the end of the cul-de-sac. Lights off, engine running. It sat there for hours. No one got in or out. I don't know if it was paranoia or truth, but I felt watched. Days later, I found a note taped to my front door. No envelope, no signature, just block letters written in thick black marker. Pay or leave. I froze when I read it. The wind rattled through the trees, but all I could hear was the pounding in my chest. They weren't just threatening paperwork anymore. They were threatening me. I called my lawyer, showed him the note. He frowned, shook his head. Keep it, he said. Document everything. This is intimidation. Judges hate intimidation. So I kept it. I kept every scrap of paper they threw at me, but I also started looking deeper. I wanted to know why they were obsessed with me, why one cabin outside their control made them so desperate. And then, I found it. One late night, while scrolling through county property records, I saw something strange. The HOA president's husband had been buying small plots of land near the woods, not just one or two, but several. All around my cabin, the plan became clear. They wanted the whole area. They wanted to expand their control, annex the land, and my cabin was in the middle. I wasn't just a homeowner to them, I was an obstacle worth crushing. The realization made my blood run cold. This wasn't just pettiness. This was greed and power and money. They weren't after me for breaking rules. They were after me because I stood in the way. I decided I couldn't just defend myself anymore. I had to strike back. I filed a countersuit. This time, not just to erase the lien, but to accuse the board of harassment, intimidation, and abuse of power. The court date was set, and once again, the neighborhood buzzed with whispers. The day of the hearing, the room was packed. Neighbors filled the benches. Some came to support me. Others came to see me fall. The HOA board sat across from me again. The president's face was tight, her jaw locked, but her eyes burned with fury. My lawyer stood. He presented the evidence, the false letters, the intimidation note, the boundary map, and finally, the property records of the president's husband. The courtroom gasped when they saw the pattern, plot after plot, all leading toward my cabin. The judge's face hardened. He turned to the HOA president. "Ma'am, were you planning to annex this land without county approval?" She hesitated, stammered. Her voice cracked as she said, "No, it was for the good of the community." The judge leaned back, unimpressed. "The good of the community," he repeated slowly, "or the good of your own pocket?" The room fell silent. I could see it in her face. She was caught. For the first time, the mask slipped, and everyone saw what she truly was. But that wasn't the end. The president's lawyer tried to shift the blame. He accused me of exaggerating. He said the note on my door was probably a prank. He said I was making drama. I sat there, fists clenched, trying not to explode. But then, something unexpected happened. A neighbor stood up. It was Mrs. Carter, an elderly woman who lived 2 streets away. She raised her hand, her voice trembling but steady. "Your Honor," she said, "I got the same kind of notes. When I refused to pay for a new clubhouse roof, they came after me too." The courtroom buzzed. Then another neighbor stood, and another. One by one, they spoke. Stories of intimidation, threats, fake fines. The board's secrets spilled out like water from a broken dam. The president's face turned white. The treasurer buried his head in his hands. The secretary's pen slipped from her fingers. The judge raised his hand for silence. "I have heard enough," he said. "This board has abused its authority. This is not governance. This is harassment." My heart pounded. I could feel the weight of months of fear lifting. The judge continued, "The lien is permanently void, and this board will be investigated for misconduct." The gavel struck. The sound echoed like thunder again. But this time, it wasn't just my victory, it was the neighborhood's victory. I walked out of that courthouse into the cool afternoon air. Neighbors patted me on the back. Some thanked me. Others looked ashamed for not speaking sooner. But all of them knew. The HOA's reign of fear had cracked that night. I sat on the porch of my cabin. The forest was quiet. The stars burned above. For the first time in months, I felt peace again. But deep down, I wondered, would they stop? Would people like that ever truly stop? Or was this just the beginning of another battle? When the gavel struck that last time, I thought the war was over. I thought the judge's words would echo through the neighborhood and silence the HOA forever. But I should have known better. Evil doesn't vanish in one day. It hides, it waits, and it returns when you least expect it. The board was humiliated. Neighbors whispered about their lies. Some members resigned quietly, slipping away like shadows. But the president, she stayed, and even stripped of her power. She still lingered like smoke in the air. For a few weeks, life felt normal again. I went back to my job, drove to my cabin, sat on the porch with a cup of coffee, and breathed freely. The air tasted sweeter when you're no longer suffocating under fear. I even laughed again, something I hadn't done in months. But normal never lasts long in the suburbs. One morning, I woke up to find my mailbox hanging open. Inside was a single sheet of paper, no letterhead, no signature, just words scrawled in black ink. "You may have won in court, but you'll never belong here." I froze. The sun was rising. Kids were riding bikes down the street. Sprinklers hissed on lawns. Everything looked normal, but that note made everything feel rotten. I tried to ignore it. I told myself it was nothing, but then small things started happening. Trash cans tipped over in front of my house. My car tires mysteriously deflated overnight. One evening, I came home and found raw eggs splattered against my garage door. Childish pranks, maybe. But they carried a message. Someone wanted me out. I walked to the HOA president's house. I stood on the sidewalk, staring at her perfect white shutters, her trimmed hedges, her flawless driveway. Oops, he was inside. I could see the shadow of her moving across the curtains. I wanted to knock. I wanted to demand answers. But I didn't, because I realized people like her don't confess. They manipulate. They whisper. They let others do the dirty work. The psychological games grew worse. I started receiving anonymous calls late at night. Static. Silence. Then a click. I'd hang up. But the phone would ring again, over and over, until I unplugged it. I tried to tell myself I was imagining things, but the fear was real. Every night I checked the locks twice, sometimes 3 times. Every sound outside made me jump. The war might have been won in court, but inside my mind, it was still raging. Neighbors treated me differently too. Some smiled politely, but there was distance in their eyes. Others crossed the street to avoid me. It was like I had become a ghost in my own neighborhood, visible, but untouchable. Only a few dared to talk to me openly. Mrs. Carter, the elderly woman who spoke up in court, often came by with cookies or tea. She told me I did the right thing, but even she admitted she felt uneasy now. "They don't forgive," she whispered one afternoon. "Not people like them." Her words stuck with me. Not people like them. One night, I drove out to my cabin again. The forest was quiet, the moon bright above the trees. I sat on the porch and listened to the silence. For the first time in weeks, I felt safe. But then I noticed something. Nails scattered across the dirt road leading to the cabin, hundreds of them, sharp and shining under the headlights. If I hadn't slowed down, my tires would have been shredded. It wasn't random. Someone wanted me stranded out there alone. In the dark, my chest tightened. I picked up a handful of nails and let them fall slowly through my fingers. This wasn't petty anymore. This was dangerous. The next morning I called my lawyer again. He sighed when I told him. "Legally, there's little we can do without proof," he said. "But keep documenting everything. Sooner or later, their mask will slip again." Proof. Ooh. That word haunted me because I knew the HOA president was clever. She didn't leave fingerprints. She didn't shout threats in public. She whispered them through notes, through shadows, through silence. Weeks passed. The pressure built like a storm cloud over the cul-de-sac. The HOA board was fractured. Some members gone, others silent. But the president kept showing up at every neighborhood event, at every meeting, like nothing had happened. Her smile returned. But it was thinner now, sharper, and every time our eyes met, I felt her hatred. Then came the twist I never expected. One afternoon, a man knocked on my door. He was middle-aged, wearing a suit, holding a briefcase. He introduced himself as a private investigator, and he said the words that froze me in place. I was hired by other homeowners to dig into the board's finances. My stomach dropped. He opened his briefcase and showed me files, bank statements, receipts, hidden accounts. The HOA president and her husband had been funneling money from community dues into their own pockets for years. Tens of thousands of dollars, stolen vacations, luxury furniture, even a secret property upstate, all paid with the community's money. I stared at the papers, my hands trembling. This wasn't just corruption. This was theft, and the whole neighborhood had been paying for it. The investigator leaned closer. "You've already cracked their power," he said. "Now we finish the job. Do you want in?" I sat back, speechless. For months I had been fighting for my cabin, for my freedom. But now, I realized the battle was bigger than me. It wasn't just about my lien. It was about justice for everyone they had cheated. I nodded slowly. "Yes," I whispered. "Let's bring them down." The weeks that followed were chaos. Rumors spread like wildfire. Neighbors demanded answers. Meetings turned into shouting matches. And finally, law enforcement got involved. I'll never forget the sight. Police cars pulling up to the president's perfect house. Officers walking out with boxes of files, computers, records. Neighbors gathered on lawns, whispering, pointing, and the president, standing in her driveway, her smile finally gone, as she was led away in handcuffs. That night I walked the street quietly. No one avoided me now. Some clapped my shoulder. Others whispered, "Thank you." For the first time, I felt like I wasn't alone anymore. But even in victory, the question haunted me. How many HOAs are out there, run by people like her? How many neighborhoods are trapped under the same petty tyranny? And how many more battles like mine are waiting to be fought? The president was gone, taken away in handcuffs. Neighbors watched as her perfect little kingdom crumbled. The same woman who fined people for weeds in their yards was now exposed for stealing thousands from the community. I thought the nightmare was finally over. But the truth is, when power breaks, it doesn't disappear, it scatters. And when it scatters, it becomes dangerous in new ways. The HOA board was leaderless. Meetings turned into chaos. Everyone argued. No one agreed. Some wanted to disband the HOA completely. Others wanted to replace the president with someone better. But I knew better. Give power to new faces, and the same poison would return. So I decided to play a different game. I decided to fight them on their own turf. Not with anger, not with shouting, but with compliance. Revenge by compliance. I started small. I read every bylaw, every rule, every single line of their massive rule book, and I followed each one to the letter. The board tried to hold meetings at odd hours, so I showed up right on time with my stopwatch and reminded them that bylaws required reasonable scheduling. They sighed, rolled their eyes, but had no choice but to delay when they told neighbors to paint their fences natural colors only. I painted mine the exact shade of wood brown listed in the rules. They did it, but they couldn't find me when they required all mailboxes must be uniform. I ordered the exact model they approved, but in bulk, and gave them to neighbors for free. Suddenly, the whole street looked identical, too identical, like a parody of their own rule. The neighbors laughed, the board squirmed, and I smiled quietly. Word spread. People started coming to me with questions about the rules. I showed them loopholes, hidden lines, forgotten clauses, the same rules the HOA used to crush people. I now used to protect them. It was like turning their own weapon back against them. Mrs. Carter planted a garden in her yard when the board tried to say it was unsightly. I pulled out page 87 of the rule book. It clearly allowed small decorative gardens. Her flowers bloomed, and the board fumed. Another neighbor, Tom, parked his old RV in his driveway. They said it was against the rules, but I showed him Section 12, which allowed temporary recreational vehicles for personal use. So Tom parked it, washed it, camped in it, and dared them to fight him. They couldn't. Slowly, the power shifted, not because the HOA disappeared, but because the community learned how to fight back, with knowledge, with compliance, with patience. But the board didn't give up easily. A new president stepped in, a man named Greg. He was quieter than the last one, but just as petty. He didn't scream or threaten. He smiled politely and tried to outmaneuver me in silence. One night, he knocked on my door. He stood there with his neat haircut, his pressed polo shirt, his clipboard. "David," he said softly, "you're making this harder than it needs to be." I stared at him. "What's harder?" I asked. He leaned closer. "Living here. If you just stopped digging, stopped pushing, life could be peaceful again." Peaceful, that word again. But peace meant surrender, and I wasn't going to surrender. I smiled back at him. "Greg," I said, "I'm just following the rules." For the first time, his smile slipped. He left without another word, and that's when I knew compliance was working. But the strangest part was how the neighborhood changed for years. People were afraid to speak up, afraid of fines, afraid of retaliation. Now, they laughed at the rules. They treated them like a joke. And in a way, that was more powerful than any courtroom victory. Kids painted chalk drawings on sidewalks. Neighbors decorated their lawns with gnomes and flamingos. Someone even built a 6-foot pink mailbox just to prove a point. And when the board tried to complain, everyone pulled out the rule book and showed them exactly why it was allowed. The board's authority cracked a little more each time. Their once fearful voices now sounded tired, hollow, almost desperate. But the war wasn't without cost. The board started targeting me personally. They filed anonymous complaints about noise from my house. Even though I live alone, they tried to fine me for parking too close to the curb. When my car was perfectly within the lines, they even claimed my grass was 1 inch too long. I laughed as I pulled out the measuring tape and proved them wrong. Neighbors gathered to watch those little battles. It became entertainment. Every petty fight turned into a public humiliation for the board, and the more they lost, the angrier they became. Then one night, something strange happened. I got home late from work. The street was quiet, but as I pulled into my driveway, I noticed something on my porch, a stack of papers. At first I thought it was another notice, but when I picked it up, I realized it was different. It was the HOA's own financial records, every receipt, every check, every hidden expense. Someone had left them for me. No note, no explanation, just evidence. I carried the stack inside, my hands shaking. Was it a trap? Or was someone inside the board finally cracking? I spent the whole night reading, and what I found made my stomach turn. Even after the old president was gone, the new board was still misusing funds. Lavish dinners labeled as community planning, golf trips marked as strategic meetings, thousands of dollars vanishing into vague categories like miscellaneous improvement. It wasn't just corruption, it was greed. And it was still happening, right under everyone's nose. The next morning, I faced a choice. Do I expose them again? Do I drag the neighborhood back into chaos? Or do I stay quiet, keep my peace, and let the cycle continue? I looked out my window at the street, kids riding bikes, neighbors chatting over fences, lawns freshly cut. It looked peaceful, but I knew the truth. That peace was built on lies. I folded the papers carefully, and I asked myself, was it worth it to fight again? Was it worth it to tear open the wounds just when the neighborhood was starting to heal? That's where I'll leave it for now, because I want to know what you think. If someone handed you proof that your HOA board was still stealing money, after everything that happened, would you expose them and risk another war? Or would you stay silent and let the illusion of peace continue? I stared at the stack of papers on my kitchen table, the HOA's secrets, their spending, their lies. The more I read, the heavier it felt. It was proof that even after the president was gone, the corruption never stopped. But what do you do with proof? Do you burn it, lock it away, pretend you never saw it, or do you hold it up for the world to see? That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, listening to the hum of the streetlights outside. Every creak in the house felt like footsteps. Every car passing by made my chest tighten, because I knew the moment I used those papers, everything would change. The next morning, I made a decision. I walked to the community clubhouse. It was Saturday, the day of the monthly HOA meeting. The room was crowded, neighbors whispering, board members sitting stiff in their chairs. Greg, the new president, cleared his throat. He tried to sound calm, but his voice carried tension. As you all know, he began, we're rebuilding trust in this community. That's when I stood up. I carried the stack of papers to the front table, and without a word, I dropped them in the center. The room went silent. Every eye turned to me. Greg frowned. What is this? He asked. I stepped closer. Your records, I said quietly. Your dinners, your golf trips, your missing money. Gasps filled the room. Neighbors leaned forward, whispering. Greg's face turned pale. His lips trembled. This is private, he snapped. But the neighbors didn't care about private anymore. They wanted answers. For the next hour, the meeting unraveled. Voices shouted. Accusations flew across the room. Old wounds reopened. Neighbors who had been silent for years now stood and spoke. They talked about intimidation, harassment, stolen money. The board tried to calm them, but it was useless. It wasn't a meeting anymore. It was a rebellion. One man, Mr. Harris, slammed his fist on the table. I've paid dues here for 15 years, he shouted, and all the while you've been stealing from us. Mrs. Carter stood up again, her voice shaky but loud. We trusted you, and you treated us like fools. The room erupted. Neighbors demanded resignations. Some screamed for the board to step down immediately. Others shouted for the HOA to be dissolved completely. Greg tried to speak, but every word was drowned in anger. His voice cracked. His face reddened. He realized, for the first time, he wasn't in control. The meeting ended in chaos. People stormed out. Some stayed behind to argue, but the board was broken, their authority shattered in front of everyone. That night, I walked home slowly for the first time. I didn't feel alone. I felt like the whole neighborhood was finally awake. But power doesn't die quietly. It claws. It scratches. It tries to survive. The following week, the HOA launched a campaign. Flyers appeared in mailboxes, neatly typed letters, claiming the board was misunderstood, that I had twisted information, that the community needed strong leadership. It was propaganda, pure and simple. But this time, the neighbors didn't buy it. Instead of silence, they laughed, they compared notes, they shared stories. And slowly, a plan formed. A group of neighbors gathered in my living room one evening. The air smelled like coffee and old paper. They sat in folding chairs, some on the floor. We spread out the records across the table. We've had enough, Tom said firmly. We're not just fighting them anymore. We're replacing them. I nodded slowly. The idea was bold, risky, but it was time. We decided to call for a recall election. The bylaws allowed it, buried in fine print. If enough homeowners signed a petition, we could vote the board out. For weeks, we went door to door. We knocked on every house. We explained everything, showed the records, told the truth. Some were skeptical, some were afraid. But most were furious. They signed one by one, page by page, until we had enough. The board tried to block us. They claimed the petitions were invalid. They said the signatures didn't count. But the rules were clear. And this time, they couldn't twist them. The date was set. The recall election would decide everything, the night of the vote. The clubhouse was packed. Neighbors filled every chair, lined the walls, even stood outside the doors. The air was heavy with tension. Greg sat at the front table, his face stiff, his eyes darting nervously, one by one. Homeowners cast their votes. Paper slips dropped into the box. Each one felt like a nail in the coffin of the old board when the counting began. Silence filled the room. The secretary's hand shook as she read the numbers, and when it was over, the result was clear. The board was out, though. The room exploded with cheers. Neighbors hugged each other. Some cried, for the first time in years. The HOA had no grip on us, but the victory wasn't just about removing the board. It was about reclaiming the neighborhood. The fear was gone. The whispers were gone. People spoke freely again. We decided to form a temporary committee, not to control, not to fine, but to rebuild trust. We agreed to review every rule, every bylaw, every pointless regulation. Some rules we kept, others we burned, and the more we cut away, the lighter the neighborhood felt. Lawn inspections stopped, mailbox fights ended, and for the first time, kids could ride bikes without someone measuring the distance from the curb. But the strangest thing was Greg. After losing the election, he disappeared. His house went dark. His car never moved. Some said he left town. Others said he was hiding, waiting for a chance to come back. I don't know the truth, but sometimes, late at night, I feel eyes on me, a shadow at the end of the street, a curtain shifting across the way. Power may leave the chair, but it never leaves the person who once sat in it. Still, the rebellion had worked. The neighborhood was free. For now, but freedom has a cost. The friendships broken, the trust destroyed, the scars left behind. As I sat on my porch one evening, watching the sunset bleed across the rooftops, I couldn't help but wonder, did we win? Or did we just buy ourselves time before the next fight? The rebellion was over, but the silence after felt louder than the fight itself. For the first time in years, the HOA had no board, no one sending fines, no one measuring lawns, no one slipping notes into mailboxes at night. Neighbors called it freedom. But freedom can feel strange. When you've lived under control for so long, the first weeks were like a festival. Kids drew chalk dragons across the sidewalks. Tom parked his RV right in the middle of his driveway and strung Christmas lights across it. Mrs. Carter planted an entire row of sunflowers that towered over her fence like soldiers standing guard. The neighborhood laughed, played, celebrated. But underneath the joy, there was unease, because order was gone. And when order is gone, some people panic. I saw it slowly. Lawns grew wild, cars piled up in driveways. One house painted its siding neon green just to prove it could. The street started to look different, less like a suburb, more like a collage of clashing personalities. Some loved it, others hated it. One neighbor muttered as he mowed his yard, "This place is going downhill," another said proudly. "This is what freedom looks like." I stood in the middle, watching both sides pull against each other. Then came the meetings, not HOA meetings, but neighborhood gatherings. We sat in living rooms, garages, even front yards. People argued over everything. Should we form a new board? Should we leave things loose? Should we trust each other? The arguments turned sharp. Voices rose, and sometimes the same people who once hated the HOA now begged for rules again. It was ironic, the very cage they fought to escape. They now wanted back. And through it all, I felt the eyes. Greg's house stayed dark. But sometimes, I swore I saw a shadow at the window. One night, walking past, I noticed the blinds move. Another time, I heard the faint click of a camera as I walked by. Was he watching, waiting, or was it just my imagination? The thought followed me home. It crept into my dreams, and even as the neighborhood celebrated freedom, I couldn't shake the feeling the war wasn't over. One night, I was sitting on my porch at the cabin. The woods were silent, the stars heavy above, and I thought about everything we'd been through, the lien, the courtroom, the rebellion, the downfall of the board, and I asked myself, was it worth it? I had won. The neighborhood had won, but we were scarred. Friendships broken, neighbors divided, trust shattered. We tore down the monster. But in doing so, we tore pieces of ourselves too. A week later, a letter appeared in my mailbox. No stamp, no name, just folded paper. I opened it slowly, expecting another threat, but it wasn't a threat. It was a warning. Be careful who replaces the board. Wolves wear many masks. I froze. The handwriting was unfamiliar, but the message was clear. Someone in the neighborhood, maybe even someone I trusted, was already plotting to rebuild the HOA in their own image. Freedom was temporary. Power always tries to crawl back. I started noticing small shifts. A group of neighbors meeting quietly in garages, whispers at the grocery store, talk of forming something new. At first I ignored it, but then I heard my own name. They said I was too disruptive, that I had stirred up chaos, that maybe I shouldn't even live here anymore. It hit me harder than I expected. I had fought for them, bled for them, risked everything, and now they wanted me gone. One night, Mrs. Carter knocked on my door. She looked tired, her hands trembling around a cup of tea she brought me. She sat at my table and whispered, "They're turning on you, David. They want someone to blame, and you're the easiest target." Her words cut deep, because I knew she was right. When people are afraid, they don't thank the one who freed them. They fear him, because he reminds them of the fight, and they want to forget. The next few weeks felt like walking through fog. Neighbors who once cheered me now turned cold. Some avoided me altogether. Others left anonymous notes on my door again. But these weren't threats. They were demands. Stop stirring trouble. Leave the neighborhood alone. Move away. It was like déjà vu. Different words. Same poison. And then, it happened. At a neighborhood gathering, a man stood up. He cleared his throat and said loudly, "I propose we form a new HOA, one with transparency, one that won't abuse power." The crowd murmured. Some nodded, others frowned, and I felt the weight of every eye on me. They waited for me to speak, to argue, to fight, but I stayed silent, because I realized something in that moment. No matter how many times you kill it, the HOA always finds a way back. Different faces, different names, same hunger for control. It wasn't just my neighborhood, it was human nature. That night, I drove out to my cabin again. The road was quiet, the forest still. I sat on the porch with the wind brushing through the trees, and I thought about everything. Maybe I couldn't stop the HOA forever. Maybe no one could. But I could tell the story. I could share the truth so that others, in other neighborhoods, would know they weren't alone. That's why I tell you this now, not just as a story, but as a warning, because the next time you hear about a lien, a fine, a petty rule about mailbox height or lawn color, remember me, remember this fight, and remember what happens when neighbors forget that power always hungers for more.